Thank you very much, Buck. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. According to my sources, I knew about the musical prelude, and I know from knowing Holden for some years that music is an important part of his life and way of engaging. So I thought about writing him and asking him what the musical selection would be so that I could make an appropriate comment. I decided against that and thought I would just remind you, or to tell you rather, the meaning that music has had in my life. Music is one of the things I learned early, and indeed, just about every place in the world I've ever been, there is a similar message about the power of music to tell stories, the power of music to convey images and history and life. Music also detracts and creates a soothing and calming ambience in an otherwise noisy world. Music is also one of those tools for someone who is shy, as I have always been. Music is a means by which we convey to someone things that we aren't quite brave enough to say, or that serves as our introduction before we arrive. There was a time in my courtship where I would, this is in the old technology, I would tape a song from the radio that had a message, and then I would send the tape to my wife-to-be. I wasn't quite yet ready to say the things that could be conveyed with properly selected music. And then I picked up the habit when iPods were invented, that if I'm in the gym and feeling a little tired and or lazy, that I could make an appropriate selection from my iPod and be distracted for 8, 10, 12 minutes and get additional exercises without realizing that a few minutes ago I felt tired and exhausted, but I had, via music, found new energy. This is a wonderful room, and every time I come to Chapel Hill, I think of the room across campus that I had an experience in that I won't forget. When I was a sophomore, I was taking French 4, and at that time there were common exams, so everybody on campus taking French 4 would show up in Memorial Hall for the exam. And of course, French 4 had an oral component. So this was May, final exam. I show up, and it was very hot. It was a very hot day. So I said, I'm going to sit near this window so that I can catch a breeze. Well, I caught a breeze and missed the oral part of the exam because of trucks and traffic outside. I entered that room with an A in French, and when I left, at least to the extent that the final exam counted, I did not have an A. So now I'm cautious about more than one reason for making a selection about where I sit or stand and so forth. If there's any takeaway from the comments I make today to this group, which is part of the Entrepreneurship program at UNC, if there's one word that I want to leave you with, it is the word intention. Leave you with a sense of the power of intention. So much good can come when intention is declared, when it's framed, when you can then sell it, and when it is pursued. I hope it comes through from sharing my personal story, my experience at MIT and the institution's history, and I hope I can convey something that will be useful to you in this program. Intention has a prominent role in my life. Yes, there have been some accidental things, but there were also some things that were intended for me or that I came to intend to pursue. So first, a bit about myself. I started my life humbly in Wilmington, North Carolina. I was the first in my family to go to college. How many people are from Wilmington or nearby? I'll speak to Steve Farmer about that. How we get so few? Anyway, glad to have you. I started out in Wilmington. And as a young person, I was the kind of young person, as you might imagine, who read a lot. I read a lot about the wider world that existed beyond that small place. I was also the kind of 9-year-old that looked at Meet the Press. You know what Meet the Press is, right? Well, I watched Meet the Press as a kid. Anyway, I knew about the wider world. I did a lot of reading about the world beyond, and I knew that there was something far beyond Wilmington that was exciting. I had very few opportunities to see those things. I was a dreamer, and my dreams were not in isolation, and they were not otherworldly. I like to think that my dreams were always grounded in being a part of something that was beginning to happen in the world that I might become a part of. This was a period in the late 1950s and 1960s when the world was changing, when there were developments in the country and in the world, the civil rights movement and other things that I very much resonated with in terms of the excitement they generated. The Supreme Court Brown case occurred on my 8th birthday, and I recalled the hushed tones among family and friends saying that integration would never happen, and that if somebody tried, there would be lives lost. Sadly, that would become true, but it would not be daunting. I also recalled a few years later, in 1962, that President Kennedy made a speech in which he challenged the nation to send a man to the moon by the end of that decade and bring them home again. And I recall my grandmother saying, "Why are we going to the moon? Why are we going to bother the moon?" But at the same time, there was an appreciation for the power of division and for the secondary events that would occur starting at that time and that would continue for more than a decade. The focus on education, on making huge investments in education and bringing that to a new generation. Now, there was some skepticism, but there was also an appreciation. I also remember the early days of the civil rights movement when I was in high school, convincing my high school English teacher, who had assigned the class the assignment of reading Wuthering Heights. As you might imagine, being a big fan of Meet the Press, and having read the story of Ralph Bunche. Now, Ralph Bunche was the Undersecretary General of the United Nations at the time. He was a black kid who had grown up in Washington, had gone to UCLA, gotten a PhD, taught in the university, and was passed over for a position in Washington in the Truman Cabinet. But he was selected to be Undersecretary General of the UN, and he won the Nobel Prize. So wandering through the library, I found that biography, and I went to the English teacher and said, "I want to read this book and report on it, not Wuthering Heights." And of course she said no. And uncharacteristically, I nagged that teacher for days until she finally said yes. I was determined to get that insight. I'm in love with biography even to this day. I do read a few interesting novels, but probably 10 biographies that where I conclude that history is far more important than what we can typically make up. I also had an intention to be a baseball player, and I tried desperately to master the basket catch that Willie Mays became famous for. Now, I know all of you don't even remember Willie Mays, but I was a New York Giant fan because Willie Mays captivated me, and I tried for years to master the basket catch. I was successful in busting my lip a couple of times, and I realized that I should stick to what I was good at, which was not baseball. Now, my dreams were not otherworldly, and I did not live my life in a bubble, and I did not grow up in a bubble. I had the good fortune of going to Williston Senior High School, which had a legacy going back to the days immediately following the end of the Civil War. Freedmen, early parents from that period, and missionaries had targeted the black children in that community for real education, not training. They intended that they would provide education as it was known by the missionaries from New England. The parents did not know about education. They had not had education up to this point. And training, to the extent that it existed in the South, had to do with preparing people to do the jobs for which they would be hired. So if you were black, if you were an ex-slave, you would be trained to perhaps put on horseshoes or cook, but you would not be, quote, educated. Now, this school and a few other schools across the South, so this wasn't the only school, that was not the case. Now, the school did have auto mechanics, but it also had Latin. It did have commercial cooking, but it also had advanced biology. And the school, when I was there, participated in a statewide program at the time where, as part of this advancement to get a man on the moon, a common course was offered, a number of common courses were offered to all high school students, a common exam, and the ability of our students to perform well on those tests gave us confidence that we were in the mainstream, that we could perform, and that we could succeed. Now, my departure from Wilmington was not accidental. I recall sitting on the porch many, many days, daydreaming of the world beyond the narrow experience that I had in Wilmington. And I intended to leave Wilmington. I tried to be diplomatic in talking to my relatives, including my parents, about that, but it was always clear that I would leave. The words that I would use to express my feelings at the time were not clear to me then, and I would only discover them in the words of Richard Wright some decades later. And I'll read you a passage from a book by Richard Wright written in 1945. The title of the book was Black Boy. Here are the words. I was leaving the South to fling myself into the unknown. I was taking a part of the South to transplant in alien soil, to see if it could grow differently, if it could drink of new and cool rains, bend in strange winds, respond to the warmth of other suns, and perhaps to bloom. Those were my thoughts exactly. Once I realized from Richard Wright how beautifully that sentiment could be conveyed. In the first stop on my journey, I did not have to leave the South. I came to Chapel Hill, where I found my voice and would receive a wonderful education. I gained a new sense of who I was and what I could become. I did not feel limits, even though there were limits all around. I was not blind to the racial reality outside of the gates, and I did not feel bound by them. In Chapel Hill, I learned a lot of academics, even enough French that I've been able to work my way through Paris many times. And I learned what vision was, and I learned about leadership. On the vision thing, I recall one student government setting where a number of us met with a group of businessmen who were visiting the campus. They explained to a group of us their plans for creating a research triangle.
Your mic is Reset it. But it should. It just reset for no reason. So the mic won't come on for another 2 minutes. That's okay.
Okay.
This one won't work. So
Okay.
If do you want to?
Now, I know I heard someone say an MIT person should be able to fix this, but
We were saying our checks are all be responsible.
Yeah, it should come back. It'll come back on. Hold on. Can you? Well, hey, can y'all hear me in the back?
okay, I'll speak louder. Can you hear me back there? Okay, let's go forward. So a group of businessmen came to campus to make a presentation, and they included a group of us students in that. And they explained to us that they were going to develop the land between Chapel Hill, Raleigh, and Durham. They explained the value that could be created if the state would invest in this research triangle. They talked about the powerful role it could play in conveying to the nation and to the state the role that the universities could play in making North Carolina a leader in the then emerging image of a New South. Looking at hundreds, thousands of acres of wooded land and hearing talk about a New South and the role of universities sounded very strange to me. But as you have witnessed and I have witnessed over the years, that vision became a reality. I also learned about leadership and service in this period. I recall lectures, and I don't recall which class, lectures about the servant leader concept, and discovered that there was a biblical connection to this. There was a discussion, maybe a debate, but certainly a discussion between James and John about who would get to sit at the right hand of Jesus and be the chief disciple. When Jesus heard about that, he said, I can't make you a leader and I can't make you chief. The chief servant, the leader will be the chief servant. And then I later heard from Martin Luther King the discussion about leadership and about service, and his statement that we can all be great because we can all serve. No sound yet. Those were powerful observations about me, and it's those lessons.
I think it should work now. Is your mic on?
It's on.
It is?
Okay, it's those lessons that I took with me. Great. It's those lessons that I took with me that about leadership, about personal voice, about vision, and about service that I took with me when I left in 1968 to go to MIT. Let me take a few minutes to talk about MIT. And to do that, I want to ask you to transform yourselves back to the dawning of the Industrial Revolution. It's 1861, and the nation was shifting from an agricultural and rural nation to an increasingly urban and technological one. Now, of course, we were also in the midst of a great civil war, and I doubt many people were focusing on these other transformations. But the founders of MIT had been at work for about 10 years. They sought a model of education that would allow the U.S. to embrace the promise of industrialization. Their feeling was that the typical liberal arts education, which in small colleges still focused on training preachers, was not the kind of education that would be important for the industrial age. They realized that if we were to take the promise of, embrace the promise of industrialization, we would need people who could build bridges, who would invent new chemicals and design factories and tools, and would create processes for turning labor and materials into products. Advancing an industrial order and innovation to add value to effort had to be founded in science, according to their view. Risk had to be calculated and taken judiciously. Those were sort of the founding impulses for the intention that would become MIT. And this search extended across the country and into Europe. And they concluded that there were no such institutions and one would have to be created. So they created MIT, 1861. And they settled on a set of principles that would take more than 100 years to be fully embraced. Here's what they were. First, the educational value of useful knowledge. Now, I know at a liberal arts institution, talking about useful knowledge can get you in trouble, okay? We can talk about that if you like in question and answer period. The second, the necessity of learning by doing. The motto of MIT is mens et manis, a mind and hand. And third, the notion of integrating professional and liberal arts education at the undergraduate level. Think about that. Useful knowledge, learning by doing, education that is both professional. Most of our undergraduates are bound to be engineers. But there is a 20% liberal arts requirement taught by faculty who are among the best in their field. If I ask you what's the best economics program in the world, if you were to say Harvard, I would walk out because MIT is number one and has been for a long time. Okay, so that's the intention, to create an institution committed to those three principles and a commitment to follow it and to persist at it for an indefinite period, even to this day. Now, Harvard did get the sense that there may be something good going on at MIT. They tried to acquire they tried to acquire MIT around 1915. Any impulse to be successful was quickly thwarted by the alumni. Now, our founders could not have foreseen the kind of science for which the institution would become famous. They could not understand anything about science at the molecular level. They could not understand the complexity of urban infrastructure. They could not imagine mining the depths of the ocean or the brain. And they could not imagine what corporate management was in a flat world. But they persisted in the view that these basic principles were critical for education. Now, the entrepreneurial character of MIT was part of the DNA. If you can think back to those three principles, they're all critical to entrepreneurship. Useful knowledge, learning by doing, experimentation, combining professional with the liberal arts. The founders did not use the word entrepreneurship in any of those early documents. Now, what they created, what was available to me in November 1967 when I went to MIT as part of my due diligence for graduate school, was a place where the ordinary work of passion is the only coin of the realm. On the day I visited MIT, I visited another institution who told me about their history. I went to MIT and they didn't mention history. Each person talked about their interests, their projects, and they asked me what I was interested in. And not many people had ever asked me what I was interested in. And they seemed to care. So it wasn't hard for me to decide that that is the place that I would be. And it has been my good fortune to have stayed at MIT for all of the years since 1967. The current expression of the MIT model as an entrepreneurial or innovative institution is not new, therefore. And it is now being embraced in places as close to a place down the street and as far as the most distant corners of the earth. Many universities now realize that if universities are to survive, they have to figure out a way to make themselves relevant to the world. Universities have long since passed the notion that they were training ministers, and they're becoming clearer in the view that they have to train agents for change. When I think of entrepreneurship, I think of a host of synonyms and habits of mind that will be critical for the future. For example, innovation, problem solving, invention, game changing, paradigm shift, creativity, design, collaboration are all words that we hold dear and are all words that will frame the characteristics of the university in the future that will continue to be valuable after some of our friends move some young people to online education. If 20 years from now there's a reason why young people will want to sit in the seats you're sitting in, it is because UNC will have become even better at advancing those words as part of the undergraduate education. All of these words, and others that you might think of, are modern threads that form the single garment that, when woven well and broadly shared, will create the asset, which is the one thing in the world that we can count on for a very high rate of return and endless compounding. And let me be clear that the call for entrepreneurship as a focus of the educational enterprise is not to suggest that humanities or the social sciences be sacrificed. Indeed, they need to be part of this effort. And they need to be part of it more than ever. For those who aspire to be entrepreneurs, they will need to be able to express their ideas clearly, to have insight into human and social behavior, to understand organizational complexity, and to understand the globe. People with good ideas who cannot express them, or people who are socially clumsy or ethically challenged, will not serve us well. And if they have a good idea, somebody else probably will grab it from them and take better advantage of it. Now, America has prospered in the past because, on balance, we have been far more innovative and entrepreneurial than most other places in the world. And we've done it for a long time. Though we should be clear that we did not use all of the talent we had, and we did not work very hard to pull some people, including people who look like me, from the margins of society. In the flat world in which we exist now, and in the flatter world with spires that we will have in the future, we have to ask whether the 315 million people who are Americans will prevail as leaders in a world with 6.5 billion other people. And that question will be answered in part by whether we continue to enhance our historical legacy or whether we will allow it to drift. Universities will be critical in making sure that drift does not occur. But let's be clear, drift can occur. 2 generations ago, Britain controlled most of the known world. That tiny little country over there on off the European coast controlled the known world. The sun never set on the British Empire, but they lost it all. Now, they should never have had it, but they lost it all. And now Britain is in the shadows as a nation in the world economy. And the South lost the Civil War, received the consolation prize of prevailing after Reconstruction, but wandered in isolation for 100 years. So while we can imagine things going on and on and on and on, history does not support that as a certainty. And there are already signs that our leadership is being challenged. We used to have the best educational system in the world. Now we're somewhere between Italy and Poland when it comes to K-12 education. We still have the best higher education system in the world, but I can tell you, because I've seen it, there are many places in the world that will challenge most American institutions in your lifetime. And our ability to rely on great talent coming from around the world will continue, but we won't have the advantage that we've enjoyed in the past. And whatever big numbers we can create, other places can create even bigger numbers. We educate 75,000 engineers every year. China does 250,000 engineers every year. And when we look around the world at where redevelopment is occurring or where development is occurring, we see the Chinese presence in ways that are deeper and richer than our experience in the recent years. So we have a challenge as a nation to make sure that we take action now that will match the challenges that we face in the near future. Now, there should be lots of places where the expressions of change, of entrepreneurship, of innovation, there should be lots of places where that can take expression. And universities definitely should be one of those places. And the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has been the one place in North Carolina where we have always been able to count on that impulse being exceptionally well expressed. That continues to be true. It will need to be true in the future. Now, I want to close with an argument for a focus on learning, because there is often a focus on teaching when it comes to thinking about the educational future. When I talk about a focus on learning, I'm really talking about having a different starting point when we imagine education. I want to understand that given a body of knowledge that the faculty holds, we should ask what young people should know. How do we engage them such that they gain the benefits of that body of knowledge? How do we get them to make that information their own? How do we help them understand what it is they can do using that information? And what are the tools that will empower them to go forward? These compelling questions are useful whether one has as a personal goal becoming a scientist or entrepreneur or active in one of the professions. This is a way of making sure that when young people leave, they're empowered not with raw ambition, but with grounded competence and confidence that they are prepared to take their place in the world. This kind of learning will be proactive. Students will view the university and the world around it as their laboratory for 4 years or more. Learning will be social and student-centered. Learning will focus on problem solving and will be project-based in many cases. Learning will be cross-disciplinary because the answer to many problems rests not in the contributions of a single discipline. Learning will focus on service to the world outside because many of the opportunities to test your knowledge, to use your knowledge, and to gain confidence from your personal abilities will come from activity outside the classroom. Now, the focus on learning challenges our conventional teaching focus. It will require faculty members to engage you differently. And it will require you to engage each other differently. You won't compete with each other. You will view each other as partners and collaborators. You will help each other because you will see yourselves as life partners. And a related matter to education is the importance of diversity in education. It's important not only for the moral reasons of ending discrimination, but it's important for some other reasons. When I came to the university as a freshman, only men need apply. Women were excluded from this wonderful opportunity. Now that has been changed. And we excluded minority students from that, and our little efforts created the momentum for changing that as well. But we need every talented person. We only have 315 million. We cannot abandon a single soul. We also have a need for diversity because we need the talents, perspectives, and ideas that come from a variety of experiences. And we need to be able to fill part of the gap which will come when the brightest people from around the world can choose to go to college and graduate schools in their own country, rather than only having the US and Europe as options. And economic growth requires that everyone be in a position to participate in that enterprise. This is not just about the numbers. It's about the American future. It's about whether in our universities and in our society we move beyond being a salad where the ingredients are all gathered together in a bowl, but a stew where individual ingredients are still visible, but something special is created. And it is that creation and the imagination and the intentional pursuit of that creation that really drives the country forward. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Phil. And we have some time for questions. What I was thinking, maybe we could each pull a chair out here to make it a little less formal.
Let me stand, and I'll stand with you.
Okay.
You stand with me because
All right. Okay.
we only have a few minutes left, so let's get down to some really good questions.
All right. So we have
I know they're out there. The question was, given our leadership in education in the world, what are the ways that MIT and UNC can partner to advance education in the world? Well, first of all, I did say that with respect to K-12 education, there's a lot in the world we can learn because we are not leaders in the world when it comes to K-12 education. And I'm not saying what is the lesson we should learn from the South Koreans or the Norwegians or the Singaporeans or the Chinese that we should apply in our schools. But there are lessons because in the end, their kids do better on math and science and so forth than our kids. So there's something to learn. And we have something to share when it comes to higher education. And I think there are efforts in that regard. I don't know what efforts UNC has, but at MIT we have lots of lessons. And that goes back many years. In 1960, MIT was engaged by the Ford Foundation to help India, which was then a newly independent country, to build a system of institutes of technology. And MIT was just one of several institutions engaged to do that. And we did. And the Indian Institutes of Technology now are among the best engineering schools in the world. We've had probably 5 senior administrators at MIT who are graduates of the institution that didn't exist in 1950. So they took the lessons well. and they have advanced them greatly. And their latest initiative is to build a system of health and medical schools. So they're moving from the undergraduate spheres of excellence to graduate spheres of excellence. And that's happening in lots of places around the world.
So we got one up here. You said that diversity is part of the solution. What policies have been instituted at MIT to ensure diversity, and how do other universities measure up?
Well, MIT has a lot to be proud of and a long way to go on many dimensions. But the first message was that even though we get lots of applications, we get about 18,000 applications for 1,100 seats. So we don't need to do recruitment if the issue is to get applications. But we do have the belief that there are people in the country and in the world who do not know that MIT is the place for them. That's a fancy way of saying there are people out there who would not normally apply that we go out and look for and then make the pitch to come to MIT. We spend a lot of money doing that. We have the 1,500 ambassadors who go out and go down the street or across town to talk to students. And we have about 41% actually of our undergraduates are from underrepresented minorities. About 28% Asian, and the rest split between Hispanic and African American. We beat the bushes because we know the students are out there, and there's no impediment to admitting them. We also have a policy of saying that if you're admitted, we will provide the financial aid to close the gap between what your families can afford and the $55,000 a year, which is the average cost. Now, we can do that because giving a hug to those alums means that we can squeeze money out of their pockets. And of every dollar in financial aid we give, it basically is guaranteed, about 60% of it is guaranteed from past gifts. And then those of us who have been in the administration have to go out and beg for the remaining 40%, or it comes out of the operating budget. But it's a real commitment. There are alumni who will say that, you know, I was a struggling farm boy who didn't want to be a farmer, and I stumbled on MIT, and life has been great ever since. And we tell them that story, we remind them of that story, and that outreach works. On graduate students and faculty, there's a similar outreach. We're not nearly successful there, but I can tell you that our chief rocket scientist at MIT is black. So that tells you we're working on it, and we are very proud of what we've done so far.
So do you believe that college is right for everyone, or should we focus more on community colleges and professional schools?
Excellent question. If there's anything that is upsetting to me now, it is certain words and phrases that are sneaking into the public discourse. One of those words is training. Okay? Another is not every young person should go to college. Another is we should boost our investment in community colleges. Now, each of those statements has a certain truth to them. Not every student should go to college. And many students who go to college probably should not go at age 18. They should go at age 19 or 22 or whatever age they are ready to embrace that opportunity. So I absolutely believe not every student should go to college at age 18. I believe too few students go to college. There are lots of students who are perfectly capable of sitting next to you, but for some reason, in their educational preparation, in their family situation, and the ambience around them, They did not take the step to college, and that's our loss. It's not a good thing. With respect to community colleges, my view is that they are underutilized. 27% of the kids who go to community college leave with a degree. That's a shame. I mean, that's a disgrace. So we should figure out a way to make that education as compelling as it should be, and to help the students who make that choice use it well and successfully. Now, there are some states that do a great job at community college education. Massachusetts is terrible. I'll broadcast that all over Massachusetts. It's terrible. California has been great. I can't comment on North Carolina because I don't know the facts. 25% of the freshmen at Berkeley, which is one of the best public institutions in the country, start out at community colleges. So there's something in the world in this country that we need to fix. Yeah.
So here's a good one. What are some examples of the mind habits you referenced in a previous question, particularly those you find most valuable?
Great question. Mind habits. Well, the first mind habit is curiosity. And curiosity in 99 kids out of 100 is something you're born with. You can look at any baby that's 6 days old, 6 weeks old, and they will be reaching for something that has caught their eye. And somehow along the way, in many kids, we kill that curiosity. And without curiosity, you just can't be a scientist. Whether it's a physical scientist or a social scientist, curiosity is key. Another habit of mine is rigor. That is, if you attach yourself to a problem, if you are presented with a problem, then you know that you have to go through the appropriate steps to come to a conclusion or a solution to that problem. There has to be an openness to new ideas. None of us can claim to have all of the good ideas already in your head, so you don't need any more ideas. You have to be open to new ideas, and you have to be open to change. Now, I could give you a longer list, data-driven, empathetic, passionate, all of those things. But it starts with curiosity and continues as I suggested. My feeling is that college really ought to be about transformation. To take someone who is a teenager and transform them into an adult ready to go into the world and to make a contribution. So the question is, what happens in that 4, 5, 6 year period that will make that transformation significant, compelling, and credible to you and those you meet? I can tell you, maybe you don't want to hear this, but your grade point average really won't be very important to anybody after a couple of years, after a couple of jobs. Neither will which degree you have. Whether you major in political science or history really won't matter. But it does matter whether you are perceived and you view yourself as someone who has, someone who's ready to take on their role as an adult, as a professional, as a leader. And I know sometimes students are uncomfortable with that. I had a class a couple of weeks ago where we were teaching, presenting the new plan for reimagining Detroit. And we had the chief planner in the class, and I had asked that we reserve the last 30 minutes of the class to talk not about Detroit, but about being a professional inserted in a deep problem that belonged to somebody else. And I reminded the students, they didn't need my reminding them. They said, how can we present ourselves as an expert to tell the city of Detroit that they should write off this, demolish the houses in this neighborhood, choose this industry over that industry? How can we tell them that? And the person who was the chief planner tried to answer that question and said that really the way you can tell them that the way you can tell somebody that you can operate on their brain, or that you can represent them in court to save their life or their fortune, is that you present yourself as a credible, authentic person with high integrity, knowledge about the things for which you are reportedly an expert or a professional, that you present yourself as competent without being arrogant, because nobody likes an arrogant person. And it is on that basis that when you land in Detroit or you land in an operating theater, that you will be accepted as one who can perform the service for which you have been hired. You cannot go in and say, I would love to help, but what do you think should be done? Because I'm here to do what it is you want me to do. Well, when I have that brain surgery, I don't know what needs to be done. I want you to tell me, and I want to close my eyes knowing that you know and that you will do your best job. That's the transformation. Well, the question had to do with the fact that when people who are underrepresented minorities get education, they get less income, and how we can correct that. That is true. We know from all the evidence that women perform better in school than men, and they get an income that's 75% of what men get. That gap is closing, and I'm sure it will close even more, and I think there's a similar issue with underrepresented. But just as I suggested in this case that you not be overly driven by the statistics, I would make the same argument to you. Yes, there is an income gap that is a reflection of past patterns of discrimination and some ongoing discrimination. But I would also point out that there are certainly spheres where that gap has been eliminated and where progress will be made. And I can tell you, at least in my administrative experience at MIT, there are meetings where we sit down and look at the salaries and try to determine to a certainty that the difference in salary is not a function of gender or race or anything else that should not factor in the salary differences. There are differences by age. Older people tend to make more than younger people doing the same job. And there are differences by progressive awards based on merit. But there are also cultural differences. There are some institutions where there is a culture of compression, where there are not huge gaps between people who are similarly situated. And there are other institutions where those gaps are huge. They're not based on race or gender. They're just based on if you're a finance person, you get more than if you're a marketing person.
So we're headed toward the end. I just wanted to remark on one thing which I think is important and which you may not quite get. But so Phil was a little ahead of me, but we were classmates. And what I want to suggest to you is that someone in this room is probably going to be the chancellor of MIT or a similarly situated university sometime in their career, and you're going to know that person. And similarly, many of you, most of you, will move on to have accomplished careers, but what you will probably learn is that your best friends are the people sitting here in this room or in a room very much like this, and that those relationships which get started right now will be probably the most important relationships you have in your life. And it comes home to me when I stand here and see here's Dr. Philip Clay, talking to you guys and knowing that he was a classmate of mine. So that's a perspective that I think is important for all of you to get. And I think now we should thank Phil for joining us today.
Thank you.